Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am the marginal non-hermit, and some ideas are so stupid, some policies are so crazy, that people arguing against them seem to be arguing in favor of them, and vice versa. Today I've got something for you called Weird Ideas About Welfare and the Minimum Wage, and it's based on a comment that was on the Reason blog about an article about the labor shortage a while back. One person made a comment containing the following, quote, "The problem with the minimum wage is that it leaves too many workers depending on food stamps or other services provided by my tax money. The system works because employers are sticking other people with the bill. It comes out of my pocket to supplement the wages of businesses I do not patronize and whose stock I don't own. It is my money." End of quotation. As criticism of the minimum wage, this is bizarre. With a very small set of exceptions, the employer does not have much leeway to determine wages. Rather, wages are largely determined by productivity, with some modifiers based on capital involved and the time from production to sale. In unskilled labor particularly, these two mitigating factors are usually quite small. Competition pushes labor prices upward toward the discounted marginal value of the product, but almost never above that. Products that cost more to make than they are worth on the market are not in general produced in large quantities, or if they are, they're done on a black market. If the minimum price for a cheeseburger was set at $1 million, not many would be produced. Another point against the minimum wage is that increasing labor payments increases the cost of production for goods made by that labor. For basic living essentials, this can create a cycle by which unskilled workers find themselves trapped under perpetually increasing prices. This poster's perspective of the welfare state is completely diluted. The welfare safety net is the product of state appropriation of private charity. By appropriating this process, it by definition converts a voluntary process to an involuntary one. This is true of many, if not most, functions appropriated by the state, but even for those processes that the state appropriates that would be done in a free society, the state's monopoly privilege and the lack of a functioning price system in that area means those processes will be performed inefficiently and arbitrarily at best. For instance, we can look at security and justice systems that the state runs. Last year, there were huge, long-running, violent riots in many cities, and the criminals who did millions, if not billions, in property damage will never repay what they destroyed. Many will face no negative consequences for their actions whatsoever. On the other hand, people who merely trespassed in a way the state did not like last year are being held for longer than any reasonable trespassing sentence, often in solitary confinement and under horrendous conditions. In addition to the destructive tendencies that result from violent monopoly control, the welfare state in particular has perverse results. Besides discouraging people from increasing the value of their labor, the minimum wage directs capital investment in a direction that, rather than increasing the productivity of unskilled labor, may actually convert unskilled jobs to skilled jobs. An example of this would be the production and maintenance of self-serve kiosks. That is skilled labor. It requires knowledge about programming and engineering of various types. The unskilled labor force is unfit at the moment to perform this type of labor and may find their job suddenly vanishing out from under them. Sudden increases to the minimum wage can precipitate these kinds of results and can lead to near-permanent unemployment and a state-dependent underclass. The true minimum wage, remember, is always zero. For people who are priced out of the labor market due to the minimum wage, a sub-minimum wage is far preferable to nothing. The notion that employers are sticking others with the bill for their unskilled labor force is misguided, perhaps deliberately. The employees are getting the welfare, not the employers. Changing the effective object of the welfare is a cheap rhetorical trick. The employees would generally be eligible for the welfare regardless of who employed them, whether they were large or small businesses, whether they were self-employed or not, or even if they weren't employed at all. Remember, the employers have very little leeway in how much they pay for unskilled labor. Overpaying unskilled laborers would require skilled workers to be relatively underpaid in order for the business to stay afloat, which is merely sticking a different group of people with the bill. Simply reducing profits, as many advocate, would result in investment leaving the industry and looking for greener pastures. Also of note is that the stated motivation, if not actual motivation, for these welfare payments is to cover the difference between the actual value of unskilled labor and what the state, cynically using people's charitable feelings as a proxy, decides is a livable wage. But the notion of a livable wage is mostly divorced from the productivity of unskilled labor. Therefore, it's not really a surprise that those two values don't match. In reality, constant fiduciary misconduct by the state usually exacerbates the problem and causes prices to increase anyway. Not only does the state produce new money and use this counterfeit cash to pull real resources out of the productive economy, it also pays its employees to perform tasks that would not even be done in a free society. Let's look at the ATF and the DEA for examples of that. Thus removing those people from the productive economy and shrinking production even further than otherwise would be. These people, so employed, might even have reduction of productivity in their job description. In the case of state-forced charity, it puts people into jobs that would usually be performed by volunteers or for an extremely low wage in a free society and pays them not to give charity to people, but to inefficiently distribute the dregs after they get the first big cut. You only have to look at the percentage of costs that go into the state welfare system compared to payouts and compare that number to legitimate private charities. The amount of goodwill wasted in this way is immense. The final comment, that it's quote-unquote it's their money, paraphrasing, is particularly nonsensical because it undermines the entire notion of the minimum wage and state-based welfare. The money that an employer pays for wages is their money as well, and if they're not willing to pay some arbitrary legal amount for labor, they shouldn't have to either by this logic. Once a person admits that a violent monopoly state should exist and arrogate to itself the function of private charity, let alone regulation of private business, he has lost the right to demand that the stolen money is used in the way he prefers. He may complain and use whatever minor power the state permits him to push the state in a given direction, but he has already given up on the principle. In closing, the solution to the problem of low wages and state welfare is to return to a free society, as much as possible and as quickly as possible. Private charity is more efficient and more judicious in where its funds go than a state system ever will be. The minimum wage and state welfare programs create a variety of perverse effects that hurt low-wage earners in the long run more than it helps them. Massive monopolistic states strangle production and use goods inefficiently, making the problem worse, not better. The solution is freedom and property rights, not an endless shirking of responsibility. Remember that no one, or almost no one, gets paid the minimum wage, and usually not for very long. This is because people generally strive to become more skilled, more productive, and more valuable. Upending the entire economy and handing control to a violent group of thugs we call government is not a positive solution.